Hey, it's Freiburger, and I'm about to show you a sample episode of a show that we do on MotorTrendOnDemand.com that's called Roadkill Extra. It shows up every single weekday. It's got stuff like outtakes from shows, behind-the-scenes stuff, tech tips, you name it. You can see them all with a free trial at MotorTrendOnDemand.com. Hey, it's Freiburger. I'm going to be doing a solo Q&A this time. This is the deal where I post on Facebook and say, give me questions, and then I read them and feed you answers. First of all, see this engine sitting right here? That is the old blown LS3 out of the Crusher Camaro, and people have asked about it a little bit, but I'd like to sort of get more discussion going. What car should we put that in? Now, I would like to say go ahead and comment here, but you may know that as of this point, Motor Trend On Demand doesn't have commenting, but it's coming. I understand from our tech people that we should have that by late August, early September on some of our videos, and by the end of the year, we're gonna have commenting on all the videos. And so that's gonna make this whole experience on Motor Trend On Demand a whole lot cooler because we'll be able to interact a lot more on these Q&A deals. So, let's start off. Alejandro Viñas. I did pretty good with that. He wants to know, I've seen a lot of arguing around what's the difference between patina and a rust bucket, and his bottom line question is, how do we recognize what car is rusty but good to turn into a project vehicle versus what isn't? I kind of like that question because I don't really care about paint, and I'm getting more and more okay with some holes in the bottom of quarter panels, little holes in like the floors right where the feet are and stuff like that, because that's easy enough to patch. What I'm not into is the whole floor missing all the way to the point of rusted rocker panels, so you've got nothing to weld to. When you've got rust all around like the hood hinges, to me that just opens it up into disaster. Rust through the cowl on an older muscle car I won't want to deal with. So that's all stuff that pros can fix, but for me, that is the line at which I just go, no, I don't even want to mess with this. I thought that was a pretty good question. Let's see. Oh, Peter Malcolm wants to know more about the Dirt Track Challenger and what made us turn it into the Dirt Track Challenger. Actually, I think what he's asking is why we took the Roadkill 1970 Dodge Challenger that was a dirt track car, and here on Roadkill Garage, we turned it into an off-road vehicle. Why would we do that? Just because it's cool. Because we thought that the car was not valuable enough to restore and it was okay to just hack the wheel wells out of it. I've always wanted to do it. There's nothing more fun than passenger cars on dirt. And if you haven't seen the episode of Roadkill Garage where we built that thing and went and thrashed it, you really need to, because it's a lot of fun. Let's see. Wow, people are posting like really long questions these days. It's kind of hard to just zap through them on video. I like this. Justin Littlejohn says, I think the front end of the 1970 Dodge Super Bee is one of many hideous designs that Mopar put out. The rest of the body I like, but I cringe at the side of the grille. So yeah, I have a 1970 Super Bee. I think a lot of people know that. It's an orange car. It's got a Hemi in it. It is in fact ugly, but I think that's part of the charm. It's got those two big hoops on the front. Very unconventional looking. It's not as cool as a Roadrunner, but man, you just don't see them as much as you see Roadrunners and stuff, so I think that's pretty cool. Zach Milligan, here's a real common question. How many cars do you own? Me and Finnegan. Finnegan's been getting almost at my level of bad. He keeps buying stuff. He just picked up a diesel dually, and he just picked up a 1975 Corvette, and then he's got the Firebird and the Blasphemy, and a Toyota Tacoma that he drives regularly, and of course his boats. I have something like 20 cars, 20 to 23 or 4, something like that. But also the question depends on what do you count as a car. I count like a Jeep body sitting somewhere as a car. Jason Fitch says, how do the cars on our shows get obtained? He's like, some of them obviously are owned for years, of course, but what about the random oddballs? Does the company pick up the tab? Do we resell them? So we basically buy stuff through Craigslist, just like you would. Sometimes we decide we want to go to an event, like Tony and Finnegan just shot an episode where they wanted to go to this deal in North Carolina. So they just went on North Carolina Facebook and they found something. And often when we do that, we find out that the person we're buying the car from actually is a Roadkill fan, or at least knows about Roadkill, just because I guess the type of cars we would buy are owned by the type of people who would watch Roadkill. So that happens more often than not. What do we do with them afterwards is always an interesting question, and it's a pain in the neck for our producer to deal with, because like the car that they just bought in North Carolina, once the show is over, they gotta decide what to do with the thing. You know, you're in North Carolina. In that case, we had a buddy locally that we were able to leave the car with. We plague a lot of friends with car storage all over the place. But sometimes we ship the cars home, and that costs a lot of money, so it has to be a car that we really want to keep. And other times we do just dump them, but more often we keep the stuff, and it ends up just sitting in a back lot rotting into the ground. Money no object. This is Sean Gubine. If money is no object, what car would you like to do a full-on Roadkill style thrash of? How about something properly brutal, like making an Aston Martin into a 4x4, or a T-bucket into your own roadster? Cash is open. I've never even thought of what I would do if I had absolutely unlimited cash. I'd probably build myself another land speed car. That's not really a Roadkill answer, but I think it's what I would do personally. If I had unlimited budget on Roadkill, I would probably perfect some of the cars that we already have. Like, we would really like to take Stubby Bob and make it so that it was a reliable wheel stander. Do something like a trophy truck front end on it so that we can just crash it down a bunch of times and have it survive. Maybe put wheelie bars on it. Tune the thing up so that we could just drive the thing anywhere and do wheelies at will. Then there's the Ranchero. Remember the Roadkill Ranchero? It's a 1968 Ford Ranchero. Finnegan and I have talked a bunch of times about putting an actual, like, super functional twin I-beam suspension under the front of that so we can really bash it off-road. You can kind of sense a theme of off-roading passenger cars. It's something we think about a lot, but unlimited budget, I think I would fix some of the stuff that we already have. I don't know if I've ever addressed this. Brendan Isaacson says, why not have a build-off between me and Dulcich versus Mike and Tony or Lucky, or a build-off between Roadkill versus Hot Rod Garage? We actually tried to do that one time, and I'm not sure that we've ever revealed that. In the episode where you saw us put a Cummins diesel in a Cadillac four-door, we had actually gone to that yard with the intent of doing Roadkill versus Hot Rod Garage. We each were gonna pick a car out of the yard and build it in 3 days and go race it somewhere. And it just turned into a debacle. Tony and Lucky immediately picked a 78-ish Malibu that they wanted to do an LS swap on. And Finnegan and I just walked the yard, and couldn't come up with anything that was really turning us on that we wanted to build. And we just kept thinking this is gonna be a suck episode because we're just not into it. And that's how we ended up working all four together on that Cadillac. But that was originally going to be a shootout episode. And Tony will tell you that we copped out. I don't think that's the case. I think we were more interested in what's gonna make the best Roadkill episode, and we just weren't into it. Rand Robinson wants to know, when are we going to see a Mad Max themed Roadkill episode where Freiburger and Finnegan go all out in costume at a junkyard? Don't think I'll be wearing the costume or the makeup for that. A lot of our stuff is pretty Mad Max to begin with. A lot of people said that. In fact, you know what was hilarious? Last April Fool's Day, I actually made a post saying that the Roadkill cars were going to be in the next Mad Max movie, and a lot of people bought it. But for the record, that's actually not true, in case that rumor is still lingering. Let's see. Let me find one more juicy question. Oh, this is a pretty good tech question. So Greg Tench saw an earlier episode of Roadkill Extra where I was talking about how the CFM rating on a 2-barrel carb is measured differently than a CFM rating on a 4-barrel carb. They test them at a different pressure drop, or at least Holly does. And so he wants to know, so if CFM rating is changed based on the vacuum, does the CFM rating change with boost? If so, how does a blow-through supercharger affect the CFM rating on a carb? Does it affect it differently than a root-style supercharger? Yes. So the way the carburetor is rated is that they put it on a flow bench and they have a negative pressure area or a vacuum underneath it, a pressure drop with a 4-barrel of about 1.5, well, not about, exactly 1.5 inches of mercury, and then that tells you how much airflow there is through the carburetor. They do 2 barrels, I think it's 3.5 inches. But then, if you induce a pressure on top of the carburetor with boost, you're gonna move a whole lot more air through it. So a 750 carb with a blow-through setup on it can move way more than 750 CFM. I can't tell you exactly what that number would be, but yes, it affects it a lot. Then there's the question about, is it the same for a Roots supercharger? Not exactly, because the carburetor on a Roots blower is on top of the supercharger and the supercharger is drawing through it. Now, underneath the carburetors, you generally don't see a pressure drop greater than you do naturally aspirated by a lot. Yes, the supercharger is drawing through the carburetor. It probably is drawing more through the carb CFM-wise, but the rule with a Roots blower is you don't want any inlet restriction at all. So what we find is that the bigger the carburetor you can put on like an 871 supercharger, the more power you're gonna make. And you don't really have a throttle response problem with them because that blower is cramming the air and fuel into the engine, and they're really snappy on the throttle response. So while that's a less scientific answer on the Roots blower, I would go ahead and put like a pair of 850s on a stock 350 with a Roots blower, and on a big block, I would have no problem running carburetors bigger than that. Holley sells a 950 supercharger carburetor out of the box that I would put on virtually any Roots blown dual quad application. So that's it for this time on Q&A for Roadkill Extra. Stay tuned to our social media because that's where you can see us asking these questions so that maybe you can get into one of these shows. My own is at David Freiburger, F-R-E-I-B-U-R-G-E-R. Then on Instagram and Facebook, we are at Roadkill Show. So follow all of that. Oh, and on Instagram, you can also get Steve Dulcich, who will probably be with me shooting another one of these Q&As momentarily, and you'll see that coming up right here on Roadkill Extra. If you need more Roadkill Extra, go sign up right now.